Lumi, Al Jazeera, New York.
The U.S. presidential hopeful Donald Trump has stirred up yet more controversy by appearing to mock a disabled newspaper reporter. Trump was on the campaign trail in South Carolina defending his widely discredited accusations that Muslims celebrated on the streets of America after the 9/11 attacks. He says he found an article in the Washington Post from 2001 that backed him up. He then referred to a TV interview with the author of that report, Serge Kovaleski, who suffers from a muscle condition.
Written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember. Oh, maybe that's what I said. This was 14 years ago. They didn't do a retraction.
Well, Trump's apparent mocking of that journalist only the latest incident to bring criticism of the Republican presidential hopeful. Last week, he stirred up controversy, appearing to call for the introduction of mandatory registration of American Muslims, or at least of refugees arriving in the U.S. Despite those comments and others like them, Trump is still leading the nomination race with 25 to 30% of the vote in polls of Republican voters. Let's talk to political commentator and writer Jason Johnson, who's been following the Trump campaign closely. I wouldn't think there are very many people who would watch what Trump said about that reporter and think it was a good thing that he did it. A lot of people would probably think it's unbelievably distasteful. So why do people still like him?
Well, honestly, David, because they think he's funny. And this is no different than what Donald Trump said about veterans, what he said about John McCain, what he said about Mexicans, what he said about Muslims. You notice that when he makes these comments, the audience is laughing. They're cheering him on.
Well, hang on. I can just see in the background, there was one person with a slightly embarrassed smile on his face in the red shirt. Oh, and there's another one bottom left. Nobody else is laughing. They all look rather uncomfortable. The guy is an idiot, isn't he, when he comes to communicating?
I mean, look, it's easy to say that, but we have to remember that is part of America. I mean, let's be perfectly candid. There are racist, ignorant, offensive, rude people in this country, just like you can find anywhere, and Trump captures their anger. And that's why he has stayed so popular for so long. I don't think that this is a fluke. I think he's captured essentially the ugly American in this campaign, and that's why he's maintained so successfully in the polls.
But he couldn't possibly, as rude and as bigoted and as unpleasant, I think, as he actually is, end up in the White House, could he?
That's not very likely. I mean, one thing that's very, very clear, what you're doing in the polls now doesn't necessarily translate to what you're going to end up doing in Iowa. The truth is, Trump is leading, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's got the proper team and the proper structure together. The American people tend to eventually move back from extremist candidates and pick somebody more towards the middle. If he somehow managed to get the Republican nomination, he would lose terribly to Hillary Clinton. His comments about women alone would prevent him from being able to get enough electoral votes to win the presidency.
OK, let's assume that he's running against Hillary Clinton and for some reason things go incredibly wrong for her and Donald Trump is the only viable choice left. What would the world look like 6 months after he became president?
I think the United States economy would crash. It would depend. If he ended up having a Republican Congress that supported him, he may start to change American domestic policy. But our relationships with England, our relationships with Germany, our relationships with the Middle East, our relationships with China would tank. No one would trust this president. No matter how bad people thought that George Bush was, Trump would be perceived as worse from the very beginning. And many of the promises that he's been making, he's going to make the Mexican government build a wall, that he's going to block every deal with China. All that would do is isolate the United States. It would literally possibly cause another recession and drag down much of the planet with it if Trump managed to become president of the United States.
Jason, you really couldn't make it up, could you? But you also couldn't make up the fact that there is something special about Donald Trump. Whether you like the smell of his politics or anything, he's been around for such a long time. I was a correspondent there almost 30 years ago, and he had his own airline then. I mean, this guy is a genius at something, isn't he?
Right. He is. And here's the thing. The reason that he is so popular, Americans love rich people. We love rich people who have done things that we can touch or taste. Bill Gates, Donald Trump. If I understand what you have accomplished, Americans like that because we assume that running a business is like running the government. Now, it's completely different. But that doesn't change that sort of majesty and that sort of myth-making the American public. You mix that with the fact that he's been popular on television for the last 10 or 15 years, and a lot of people, he represents the frustration that they have with Washington.
Jason Johnson, thank you very much indeed on America, the country where you can be anything you want to be as long as you succeed. Appreciate your time. See you again. Bye-bye.
Exactly. Thanks, David.
Well, a 71-year-old Chinese journalist